Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to take a look at the Clash of Blames, which is a second match between Vladimir Kramnik, the former world chess champion, and Jose Martinez Alcantara, also known as Jocelyn. Now, in this match, it's a slightly different format. The players are playing online and over the board. They're 3 days of 12 games, 6 online, 6 over the board. However, the games online are being played on the World Chess Arena. So they are not being played on chess.com, which means there's no chance of a conspiracy and everything is going to go great for Kramnik. Am I right? Well, let's jump right into the action. So the first game we're going to be looking at is from the 5th game of the match. This is in the online portion. As I mentioned before, they're playing on the World Chess Arena site. At this point, Kramnik is behind by a score of 2.5 to 1.5. And in his 5th game, he is playing with the white pieces, desperately trying to get back into the match. So the game starts out with the move e4. We get the move e5 from Jose. Now, one thing that was interesting, and especially in matches is always interesting to see, is what are the opening choices people choose to play. Now, the first game of the match, Jose played his classic Sicilian Najdorf, where he went knight f3, d6, d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3, a6, bishop e3, and Jose played e6. Now, Kramnik came prepared with this move g4, which has been very popular for many years. If black plays this move with e5 after knight f5, g6, g5, takes, d5, and queen to f3, there's a lot of theory here, but these days black is considered to be doing fine in this position. However, if you are not super prepared and you're not expecting it, you might choose not to play the move e5. And in fact, in the game, Jose played knight d7, and after g5, I think it was something like b5, a3, bishop b7, and then the move h4, something like knight c6, I think it was rook g1, bishop e7, and rook g3. Kramnik got an overwhelming position from the get-go, and he crushed Jose in the first game. So after the first game, Jose chose to play e5. Probably the players didn't have a lot of time to do preparation, and with Jose shifting away from his patented Sicilian Najdorf to playing e5, this should be an advantage for Kramnik. So we get knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. Now we have the move c3, knight f6, d3, and d6. At this point, of course, we're in the classic Gucci piano, where both sides have developed their bishops to c4 and c5 respectively. Now we get the move castles. We have the move bishop to b6 being played. Kramnik plays knight bd2. We get castles, bishop b3, and now the move a6 is played in the game. We get knight c4, bishop a7, and now we have the move bishop to g5, h6, bishop to h4, and now we have the move bishop e6. Thus far, pretty standard, but Kramnik is someone who is an opening specialist, and as you can see from the evaluation bar, white already has a nice advantage after the move knight to e3 because white has this pressure on the diagonal. White also has this knight on e3 that can jump to f5 or d5, and on top of these advantages with the bishop and the knight, white can also prepare to play d4 and build a big white center. So we get king to h8. Knight d5 is played by Kramnik. We get takes, and now we have the move knight b8, and here the move d4 is played. Now at this point, Kramnik is clearly better out of the opening, but there are some issues, and one of the important things to note is that when you play rapid or blitz versus playing classical chess, a lot of things can change. So even though white is better here objectively with the 2 Bs, you have some nice diagonals, potentially an open file, it's going to require a lot of precision, and in blitz, it's very, very hard to be precise. So we get knight d7. Kramnik plays bishop c2, we get rook to e8, we have rook to e1, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, takes, queen e8, and now we have the move queen b4. After rook to b8, we get the move rook to e1, not bishop b6. It will occur later in the game. We have the move queen to f8. Now at this point, you'll notice from the bar, white is better with the 2 bishops here. You have some nice scopes that are available in this position. You also have an open file, but one of the big issues in blitz is that finding a conceptual plan that's not super obvious can be very difficult. Whereas in this position for Jose with the black pieces, he generally has a very stable setup. What he would love to do down the road is put the bishop here so that all the pawns are guarded, and then just go after the pawns on d5 and d4. And for white, you have this idea like queen d3, for example, to try and put pressure on the king side, but you have to worry about the pawn on d5, you have to worry about rook e8, you have to worry about g5, and because there's no clear-cut plan, black here is chilling, whereas white has to find the idea. And in blitz, in many cases, it's very hard to play this position for white, even though white is objectively better. So we get the move bishop to b3 being played here. Now we have the move g5. Nice move from Jose. We get bishop g3, and now the move knight h5. Now at this point, white has double pawns on d4 and d5 that are stacked. There's pressure on the bishop on g3, which will be taken at some point later in the game. And without the 2 Bs down the road, and with these isolated pawns on d4 and d5, white is already in some trouble. So Kramnik goes queen c3. Jose plays the move bishop b6, guarding the weak point on c7, and now we get the move bishop c2. Now here Jose plays knight df6, Kramnik goes queen d3, trying to line up the classic double A battery and a checkmate on h7. Jose plays the move rook to e8, and now Kramnik goes all in with this move bishop e5. Now I love this decision from Kramnik at this point in the game because he's starting to get pushed around a little bit. If white were to trade the rooks, for example, and play a move like a3, there are problems like g4 and some queen e1 ice skater checkmate looming. There are problems also where if you go like rook f1, something like takes, and then a queen to g7 here, where these pawns are very weak on d5 and d4. No checkmate ideas on h7, and white is struggling. So Kramnik goes all in with bishop e5. We get pawn takes bishop, takes, and now we have the move queen c5. Now you will note from the eval bar that what black should do here is play a move like king to g8. This is the best move. And after takes, and knight f6, black is a little bit better here because his bishop is better than the light square b. Knight covers the square. There's ideas like queen d6, queen c5. A lot of pressure every which way here. And there also are some right triangles. Instead, Jose plays queen c5, completely reasonable. And now Kramnik plays the move rook f1, which is a huge mistake, after which he is simply losing the game. Now, what Kramnik should have done here is played the very sneaky move rook to e3. And the reason this move is so tricky is what Jose probably saw in the split second while he was calculating the queen c5 move is he thought, well, I just take the pawn. But after pawn takes knight here, suddenly black is lost because if you try to take the rook on e3, there's queen to h7 with a double A battery checkmate. If you try to trade the queen on d3, white will actually take the rook with check, and after king h7, bishop takes d3, it's spaghetti-o time. The king on h7 is simply checkmated. So if you get to this point after queen d5 and pawn takes knight, black is just lost. You cannot stop the mate on h7 or this check on e8. The knight f6, I guess, is the one last try, but after rook takes e8, if you take, of course, it's still mate in one. And if you move the king, I swap the juicers, just play something like h3, and white has an extra rook, and you resign. So Kramnik has this golden opportunity, but instead he plays the move rook to f1 after an 18-second think. And this is a clear example of Kramnik simply not playing a lot of chess, not being super sharp. And he goes for a move that looks logical to guard the pawn on f2 from being captured here. But now after queen takes d5, if you take the knight on f6, there's no rook targeting this rook on e8. So after queen takes, and knight takes pawn, black simply has one extra pawn here, and it is much better. So Kramnik goes queen f5. Now Jose plays g4, an excellent move to pressure this knight on f3. And after bishop to b3, we now get to move queen to e4. And here white is just lost because now white has no square for the queen. These knights hold everything together. They hold the pawn, they hold the queen, they hold the knights, and there's simply nowhere for this white queen to move without being captured. Now on top of that, white is already down a horse, so the rest is pretty straightforward here. We get takes, bishop f7, rook e7, takes. Now black has an extra horse on the board. Bishop f3, rook takes e5, and after g3, a knight to d2 here, forking the bishop and the rook. Kramnik resigns this game, and Jose moves out to a very big 3.5, 1.5 lead in the 3+2 online portion. So we're already seeing that Jose remains just as strong as always in the online portion, regardless of whether they're playing on chess.com, Lead Chess, or World Chess Arena. So Jose wins this game. He moves ahead by a score of 3.5, 1.5. Kramnik would win the final game in the 3+2 portion online, which means Jose won the online portion by a score of 3.5 to 2.5. Now, all things considered, that's pretty impressive because in 3+2 versus 3+1, I think that Jose is actually a little bit weaker and Kramnik is definitely stronger because the mouse skills aren't as important. So we now move to the over the board portion of the 6 games. They're playing 3 minutes plus 2-second increment, and we're going to take a look at the 12th and final game. Now, before we fast forward to the final game, this match got really close, and in fact, in the over the board portion, Kramnik came out firing. He won, I think, 1 or 2 games at the start. It was a very tense situation where I believe the match was tied at 5-5 after the 4 over the board games, and now we move to the 11th. We move to the 12th game. So in the 11th game, Jose would win a very choppy affair to move ahead by 6-5. And now in this last game of the day, Jose is playing with the white pieces. We get e4, we have c5, knight f3, d6, and now Jose plays this move c3. Now Jose throughout the entire day chose to play this setup against the Sicilian with knight to f3 and c3, and I was a little bit surprised because pretty much from the get-go he got bad positions. That being said, he's playing against Vladimir Kramnik, who's nothing better to do with his spare time than study for this match and complain nonstop on Twitter. So Jose was obviously very afraid of Kramnik's preparation, which is why he chose not to go into the Sicilian knight over d4. Instead, he plays c3. Bro thinks he's Hikaru. He's trying to play all these sidelines and make them work. We get knight to f6, bishop to e2 being played, and now Kramnik goes g6. We get castles. Important to note, by the way, this is not a free pawn here at any point because you have queen to a4, checking the king and winning the knight. This is, of course, the classic 90-degree right triangle. After you block, I take the horse and I win the game. So we get bishop g7. Now we have d3, castles, bishop e3, b6, knight e2, bishop b7, and the move queen b1. The idea behind queen to b1 being played here is that white desperately wants to build this big white center, but prior to playing queen b1, if you go d4 here, you simply lose this pawn in the center of the board. So Jose goes queen b1. Now the hope is to play d4, where both the knight and the queen guard this pawn from simply being captured. So we get the move knight c6. Jose plays h3 here. Important move, because now if you go d4 in this position, I think black can trade and go knight to g4 here, and now black is suddenly hitting your bishop, but he's also pressuring this pawn on d4 as well, and the computer already thinks that black is okay. So we get h3 to stop knight g4. White is still preparing to play d4, but now Kramnik plays this move e5. Now up to this point, all these moves had already been played in at least one, if not two, prior games, and I felt that from Jose's perspective, it's very questionable to play like this against a player who's significantly older the way that Kramnik is, because the one advantage that a former world champion has is he has great class. He's a very, very strong player, and by class, of course, I'm talking about over the board. He's a very, very strong player. He has great understanding, and the one way that you take advantage of someone not being as sharp, being a little bit older, is play things where they don't get their setups right away and they have to use time earlier in the game. So we get e5. Now we have b4 being played by Jose. We got the move takes, and now d5. Now, as I said before, Kramnik is a great opening theoretician. He has great knowledge, and as you can tell, there's a big black center here. Black is trying to put pressure on this bishop on e3. If you ever move the knight away, for example, black can simply play knight takes b4, and now you're down a pawn, and there's massive pressure in the center of the board. So Jose plays queen b3. Now in the 10th game of the match, Jose played the move b5, and after knight to a5, I believe he played queen b4, and I think we got something like rook to e8, and Jose would go on to lose in a very, very unfortunate way. He just got outplayed basically from the opening. So it didn't go very well for Jose when he played it before, so he decided to try and improvise with queen b3 instead of playing b5. But now Kramnik plays move h6, and as you can tell from the valuation bar, everything is falling apart here. White has massive problems, and the biggest issue here is that white really does not want to take this pawn, giving black open diagonals, open horses that are jumping everywhere in the center of the board. It looks really bad. But the problem is, if you don't take the pawn, let's just say you go rook e1, after d4, your bishop is suddenly trapped. There are no squares available for the bishop without being eaten by your opponent's forces. So you don't really want to take, but the other problem is if you try to move the knight to create an escape square for the bishop after d4, black will now simply take this pawn on e4, and after knight takes e4, black has won a pawn in the center of the board, and you're in big trouble. So Jose takes on d5 here. We get knight takes pawn. At this point, after a3 and knight d4, black is already much better. Kramnik has only used 4 seconds in the game so far, and it's looking like the match is going to be tied at 6 heading into day 2. So we get bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, rook e1, rook c8, and now we have the move bishop f1 from Jose. Now the big advantage black has here is he has an open c file for the tower to be used, but also he has some juicy squares for the horse. This knight can jump to either c3 or f4. So we get king h7, rook c1, and now rook c3 is played here. Jose goes queen b2, and now we get knight to f4. Now there's massive pressure on the king side, pressure towards the knights, pressure towards the pawns, pressure towards d3, and it's just not very good. So for Jose here, as I was saying during my live commentary on my kick stream, he needed to find a way to keep this game going. If he can get the game going where the players get lower on time, Kramnik still is capable of blundering if he has limited time. So you get queen to b1, trying to guard the pawn on d3. Kramnik simply eats the pawn on a3. We get the move knight to e4, and now this move bishop takes knight is played by Kramnik. This move is a huge mistake. Now overall it doesn't change the valuation, but the biggest problem for white here is that white has basically no play and no obvious moves. You can't really do anything on the file. You have to worry about knight h3, you have to worry about f5, you have to worry about pressure on the diagonal, and even though black is still better after trading the bishop, now white has ideas like trying to stack the rooks, pressuring the pawn on d4, and if white can keep the game going, anything could happen. So now Kramnik goes knight d5, we get queen b2, rook to c3, and now we have the move rook to e1. Jose is trying to stack the towers on the open line and or win the pawn on d4. Kramnik goes a5, we get the pawn capture, and now we have the move knight takes pawn being played, and here Kramnik goes a4. Material is now even here, but black is still much better simply because black has an outside pass pawn combined with this huge bishop on g7 that guards this critical a1 square down the road. We get the move queen b5, Kramnik goes a3, we have the move knight to c6, and now this move queen d6 is played by Kramnik. This is a big mistake here. If Kramnik had played the move queen to d7, he would have won this game 100% of the time, because after queen to d7, if white tries to move the knight away, you simply trade the queens, you go rook b3, attacking the knight, and after say knight to d4, rook b2 followed by a2, black is simply going to win the game because he's going to get a queen, or white will have to sack the rook. So Kramnik instead very sloppily plays with queen d6 after 7 seconds, and now after knight to e5, black is still winning, but at least there's some glimmer of hope after a2 and d4. Here, white has shut down the diagonal for the b. He's put the knight and the pawn in front of the b. That being said, black still should be able to force his pawn through. Now here, Kramnik plays the move knight f6, which is completely fine, but if he had played rook to b8 here, attacking the queen, after let's just say queen to a4, there's rook to a3, the queen guards the tower, and after queen d1, I queen and win the game. So if you go queen to e2, which is the other option here, now I go, I was going to say rook a3, but I realized there is a knight c4, so you have to be careful. It's probably still winning, but most likely queen to a3 is the cleanest way through here, because now there are no forks, unlike rook to a3, knight c4, for example. With queen to a3, white has to go rook to a1, stopping the pawn. But now after the move rook to c1, let's just say rook takes a2, black can sack the rook. With rook takes bishop, queen takes rook. Black wins the game, and if you take with the king, there is simply rook to b1 check, and after queen e1 takes, black has an extra queen and will win the game, right? Extra queen, no way black can't win. So back to the game itself, we get d4, knight f6, rook e2, rook to a8, and here Jose plays this move queen to b7. Now this is a pure coffee house move, a pure blitz move. This is not a good move, but you're hoping for some miracles. If Jose had actually played rook to a1 here, he would have been very much in the game here. It's not even clear that black is actually much better. If black takes the pawn on d4, for example, you simply trade off the rooks for the a2 pawn, and now we have the same number of pawns on the king side. If black plays the other move, is just rook to a3. Now after queen c4, guarding this pawn, but also threatening to win the pawn on a2, it's anybody's game here. And with such limited time on the clock, it seems as though, at least in my opinion, Jose probably would have survived. So instead he goes queen b7, Kramnik pushes the pawn, makes a queen, and now Jose takes the pawn on f7. Now at this point, anybody can do basic math. We'll notice that here, black has an extra queen. Black has 2 queens. A former world champion, he's got 2 queens. He's got an extra queen in this game. Surely he cannot lose this game, right? He's got to just be winning. He's got an extra queen. He's a world champion, one of the greatest players of all time. So Kramnik plays move queen a7, and this is a move that I'm not a big fan of here. Honestly, I would have suggested in this position he simply sack the queen for the rook here, and after takes, king g8 check, king h8, and rook takes e1 and something like queen d5, black has an extra rook on the board, and white does not have that many forces to attack with. But instead, Kramnik goes queen a7, trying to play proper, precise chess like a world champion who thinks he's playing a game of classical chess. So we get queen takes pawn, king g8, and now Jose plays this very tricky move, knight to g4. Now, black has an extra queen on the board. He is winning, but you have to be very, very careful here, because if you were to take the knight on g4, now white can simply take the queen on d6. If you play a move like queen to b6, for example, there's rook to e7, and suddenly I've created a kebab on the 7th rank, and you're getting mated. And additionally, if you were to play a move like, I don't know, what's another move? Can't come with an easy move that makes sense. Let's just say rook to f8 to guard the knight. Now white can take the pawn, and after king h8, knight f5, queen d5, and rook e7. Again, it's getting completely out of control, and it's anybody's guess what will happen. So after knight g4, Kramnik with 18 seconds plays a huge blunder with this move king to f8. Now you'll notice the bar went from -2. Let's do that one more time for the people at home to watch. Let's look at this bar. Boop, straight up. After king to f8, white is now completely winning in this position. White has a win if he plays the move knight takes f6, because you're threatening to checkmate on e8. If black takes, you go rook e8 takes, and after rook takes e8, it's GG, why not? Jose inexplicably here plays his move rook to e6, which is a mistake, instead of taking. Now look at the clock here. Jose has 54 seconds on the clock, but he uses all of 4 seconds before playing rook e6. And now Kramnik plays the move queen a takes d4, which you'll notice is another huge mistake here. What Kramnik should have played here is he should have played queen d takes d4, because now if knight takes knight, you check with the 2 queens, and you simply go queen g1, checkmating the white king, as it has no squares available. So After knight g4, Kramnik plays queen a takes d4. How embarrassing to capture the pawn with the wrong queen. And now Jose correctly takes the knight on f6. And once again, the idea with the checkmate on e8 is very much in play with the 2 towers and the queen. So here Kramnik plays move queen takes f2, which is apparently the only move in the position. I think after queen takes e6 here, probably white, I don't know if white checks or white takes. Either way, white is doing very well, because you have ideas like rook e8, knight h7, and black's king is completely naked. So Kramnik now decides to sack his extra queen for the pawn. We get king takes, but now black is down a piece, because when you do the count, white has 2 rooks, a queen, a knight, and a bishop. Black has a queen, 2 rooks, and a bishop. So white simply now is up a piece here, since Kramnik gave away his free queen for no reason. So we get the move queen to d4. Jose plays rook e3. Rook takes rook is played. Now there are no longer any mate threats on e8, but Jose correctly plays the move knight to h7, checking the king. King moves over, and now he takes the rook. White is simply up a knight now, knight and a pawn. In fact, black's king is weak, and white is just winning. Kramnik plays rook to a2. We get to move king to f3. We have queen to d5, and now after king to g3, Kramnik is simply lost here. There are no checks available. The bishop guards the pawn. d6 and e5 are both covered by the queen and the rook respectively, and white is just going to checkmate. Now Kramnik here, I believe, flagged before finishing the move rook to a8. Regardless if rook a8 had been played even with 1 second on the clock, he would have lost the game, because after knight to f6, checking the king, or forking the king and the queen, for example, black cannot take the knight because that would put your king in check. And when you move the king, I take the queen, and now I have an extra queen, and I will actually win with the extra queen on the board. So Jose gets a huge win in the final 2 games. He goes ahead by a score of 7-5. He's up by 2 games at the end of the first set of 12 matches. There will be 24 more games being played over the next 2 days. But that being said, it's a huge finish for Jose. He shows that he can play with great players, and this is not some magic fluke in terms of what happened in Spain a couple of months ago, but a great result for Jose. He wins the first day 7-5. We'll see what happens on the next couple of days, but it is definitely a great start. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the first day of the clash of blames between Jose Martinez Alcantara and Vladimir Kramnik, the former world champion. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps. We in fact have a game being played today in the Sinkfield Cup between Ding and Gukesh, which will be a preview of the World Championship, so stay tuned for a recap of that and a lot of other stuff. But hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you very soon. Have a good one. Bye.